Welcome to the first ever episode of Movements and Mythos, where we are going to break down the top heavy hitters in the branding space across different industries and look at what has allowed them to create a mythology and a movement that lands and movements that you ultimately cannot ignore. For those that have been in my world for a long time, you know that I'm obsessed with pop culture. I have been since I was a kid. And it's all going to meet here in the Movements and Mythos because I want to center some of my favorite pop culture icons, both alive and not alive, to look at how can we take these aspects of what has worked for them and apply it to your personal brand. And I think there's a disconnect often in the personal branding space that this stuff is for the celebrities or this stuff is for the heavy hitters. It works and it got them to where they are because it is the foundation of building something that creates an impact. It is the foundation of building something that gets attention. At the end of the day, the Taylor Swifts of the world did not get to where they are simply on their songwriting abilities. As much as we might want to say they did, they didn't. The Taylor Sheridans of the world did not build the empire he has by simply being a good writer. There is a blueprint that we can follow. And with Movements and Mythos, I want to start pulling back the layers of that. And if you've been in my world for a while as well, you know that I always say I don't look to people within my own industry or even in the realm of the same level as me and my clients when I'm looking at how do we scale and build. I look at the heavy hitters. I look at those at the top of their game. And when the Movements and Mythos idea came about, I actually had just stumbled across an interview with Taylor Sheridan in The Hollywood Reporter. Now, a lot of you are probably going to know Taylor as the writer of Yellowstone. He also has some clips where he's actually in Yellowstone itself, but he is the writer behind Yellowstone, 1883, Tulsa King, Lioness, which I highly recommend. It is an incredible show where I am actually very sad I have to wait to see the next season 3. It is absolutely incredible. Highly recommend it. But he's laid the blueprint for movements that matter and movements rooted in clarity, simplicity. You guys always know I had a client and friend today message me and she goes, this is an example. She sent me an account. This is an example of simplicity wins. So he is a blueprint for movements based on clarity, simplicity, purpose, so a bigger why, and unapologetic authenticity. And I can't wait to break this down with you guys today. So again, you're probably going to know him through Yellowstone. And while his shows span different genres, you could look at his work and say, well, actually, there is nothing that connects it. Like, look at Tulsa King. It's the mob with, oh my goodness, now it's going to drive me crazy. So Stallone, thank you, Scott. Scott yelled his name from the other room. Stallone is the lead there. To Lioness was Zoe Saldana. She is absolutely incredible as the lead in Lioness. And Yellowstone, I think we all know Costner as the lead in Yellowstone, all the drama that came around him. So you might look at these different pillars of his brand and say there's no thread, there's no similarities. But while his work spans different genres, it's all tied together by a golden thread. And in 2023, you guys know I actually launched a workshop, Find Your Golden Thread, right? So for multi-dimensional entrepreneurs like us, multi-dimensional personal brands, and I would put Taylor Sheridan in that box. He's very multi-dimensional. He has very different passions and stories that he wants to tell. Once we find that golden thread, it all makes sense. And when you center you as a personal brand, not the tools, you can more easily flow between those different genres without it seeming disconnected because you and your vision are the core pillar that tie it all together. All right, so let's dive into Taylor Sheridan. If you don't know him, I highly recommend checking out his work. I said to Scott, my husband, the other day, I said, he's the one writer, if I don't know what to watch on TV, where if you pick a Taylor Sheridan movie or TV show, you're guaranteed to have epic storytelling. And so he's made a big name for himself in that respect. He came back from when the world told him he would never make it. You might actually even remember him. Who loves Sons of Anarchy? Big fan of Sons of Anarchy. So he actually was in Sons of Anarchy. He was the cop in Sons of Anarchy. And he was basically told he would never make it. So he would never be a leading man. He wouldn't make it in Hollywood. And he came back from that. Now, I would argue that Taylor Sheridan is the Taylor Swift of the movie world and TV streaming networks right now. He is arguably propping up Paramount on his shoulders. I don't even know if Paramount has anything other than Taylor Sheridan shows on it. Certainly not anything worth watching. And he's not just a storyteller. This is what we need to learn in building personal brands. He is not just a storyteller. He's not just telling a story. He's a movement builder. And you can look at Taylor Swift. We're going to feature her on Movements and Mythos in a later episode. She is also a movement builder. They both leave unmistakable blueprints for their success, and they continue to repeat the same blueprint over and over and over again. They are not looking to rewrite this story on how to be successful. They found a blueprint that works for them. It's rooted in who they are and authenticity and the story they want to tell. And they've used true branding strategy and marketing strategy to scale it. Now, the first thing I want to look at with him is his unapologetic, authentic storytelling that's driven by something bigger than himself. Now, Michael Lombardo said about him in an interview, in a world of people who pose, he's writing what he knows and what he cares desperately about. Now, we can automatically take that away for personal brands, right? We can automatically have a look at, I do not believe that your business has to be your purpose. That is not something I believe at all. And I think most people waste a lot of time and energy trying to figure out how their business can be their purpose or how their personal brand can be their purpose. And instead of actually taking action, so many people, good-hearted people that can do great things in this world, waste their years in search of this elusive purpose and then do nothing. Help no one. So I actually don't believe that your business has to be your purpose. However, I do believe it has to be rooted in something bigger than you. And I do believe for those that I work with who are ethical innovators, ethical disruptors, who genuinely want to do good work in this world and help people, what often I find is their purpose work doesn't actually pay the bills. So for example, my purpose work is animal rescue. That is my purpose work. They don't pay the bills. They eat the bills. They eat the money. They create more bills, animals, and rescue work than you could ever imagine. And then they poop and pee on your money and the bills when they refuse to eat it with their hay. So my purpose work is animal rescue, but that's not going to allow me to continue to scale sanctuaries and fund animal rescue work and I want to help also fund, in a bigger vision, is funding research to help reduce or eliminate animal testing. Well, my sanctuary is not going to do that. My purpose work's not going to do that. So when I say why purpose-driven brands win, I don't want this to get conflated with, okay, now my business has to be my quote unquote purpose. It has to be this elusive spiritual thing that, was God-given or universe given. No, it can fund your purpose. What I like to look at is the brand has a bigger mission that it's in service to. So my brand, the bigger mission that's in service to, is funding animal rescue work and doing good things in this world in terms of reducing the harm to animals. That is ultimately the bigger why. Now, I saw this interview again with the Hollywood Reporter, and he was asked, your TV shows and your ranch are both hanging off a cliff. Which do you save? And his answer was, I do the shows for the ranch. And he had bought, and we're going to talk about it in this episode, the 4-6 ranch, which was something, I think it was $350 million. And he didn't have the money to purchase it. But he signed more deals with Paramount strictly to purchase the 4-6 ranch. And the underlying energy behind it was very much art mimicking life, or even his life's trying to mimic art, if you will, because his reason for wanting to purchase the 4-6 ranch, which you can see in Yellowstone, it's featured in Yellowstone. There's said to be a new show series coming out about it. His purpose was to preserve it, just like John Dutton and Yellowstone. His purpose and desire to save it was saving this iconic piece of history in Texas, and also through that thread, preserving the land. Because I think I can't remember how many acres, but it's the size of Los Angeles. It's a lot of acres. And if he had not purchased it, from my research, it looks like the owners were going to be forced to segment it off, just like in Yellowstone. So he had this bigger why for taking action. He had this bigger why for working his ass off. You hear people say all the time, did he take on too much? Did he do too much with all these shows he wrote? He had a bigger why. He needed, I think it was $320 million within 2 weeks to purchase the 4-6 ranch. Can you imagine needing to come up with $320 million in 2 weeks? So he had this bigger why. Yes, he loves the shows. He loves the topics of it. And he has creative control because he said, I care about the themes, and it's important for me to have the story told in a certain way. But ultimately, he does everything for the ranch, for the 4-6, and preserving that piece of history in Texas. So just like John Dutton, life imitating art, art imitating life, but he was driven by this bigger purpose, preserving the ranch. Where I see a lot of errors being made, especially in newer personal brands or those that have always felt like, they're made for more, felt as though working at corporate doesn't feed their soul, doesn't feed that fire. In fact, it drains it, is often when we're looking at building a brand, they get into a brand for things like freedom. They get into a personal brand or a business to quote unquote do good things, but there's no actual tangible why. Or I also see it to quote unquote live my purpose. That's not tangible. Or to quote unquote make more money. That's not motivation enough, right? So Taylor Sheridan, when we look at the make more money piece, yes, he was pumping out more shows to make more money, but the bigger why was to purchase the 4-6 ranch. When I look at even parts of my business and times in my business where I was like grinding and hustling, it's because I needed to come up with like $100,000 for the farm to purchase our farm animal sanctuary. And so it was putting out products and services and offers. And yes, I was working a lot harder, but it was in service to something bigger. And a lot of people are missing this bigger why. And when you miss the bigger why, not only does it start to drain you because you're like, why am I doing this shit anyway? My stuff's not getting seen. The algorithm sucks. And it's not growing as fast as my mind had decided it would. So not only do you start to get frustrated and ultimately you're going to quit, but there's no sustainability in it. If it's just to put out products or make money, go work for corporate, there's no sustainability in it. So I am a big believer that we need a bigger why, and purpose-driven brands will always win. It's also purpose-driven brands are also always going to win because it gives a movement for people to say yes to. So from day one, my work was grounded in the come on the journey with me to purchasing the farm animal sanctuary. That was my work. Come on the journey with me to purchasing the farm animal sanctuary. And when the wheels came off, I even lost sight because I had the farm animal sanctuary. And I even lost sight of the bigger why, the bigger purpose, the bigger mission. And so when I lost sight of that, I started to get comfortable, started to get complacent, and the wheels started to come off right, left, and center. I'm a big believer that we need a bigger purpose, a bigger why that we're moving from. And within that, being authentically you. Remember what Michael Lombardo said about Taylor Sheridan. In a world of people who pose, he was writing what he knew and he cared desperately about the show. What do you know? You can't storytell, at least not in an authentic way, if you don't know the topic, right? So one of my biggest pieces that has really carried the brand is my storytelling. Well, I've just been telling my story and weaving it into value. That's it. It is my story, my struggles, my wins, my experiences, my life that I weave into the stories. And that also creates that emotional connection with people that get it, that people that are hoping for someone to actually see them in their struggle and what they're struggling with and provide a solution for it. So when we look at Taylor, he's not someone that's chasing trends or pandering to the masses. We could even argue Taylor Swift is the same way, right? She's always reinventing herself with a similar thread that ties everything, and she has a similar archetype She's the everyday girl, everyday woman, the girl next door. That's her brand archetype. Well, when we look at Taylor, he's the outlaw, the rebel archetype is his core foundational archetype. They stay true to it no matter what they're doing. They stay true to who they are no matter what they're doing. Taylor Sheridan creates from a place of clarity and truth. And that, when we combine it with his unique lens, which we're going to talk about, is why his stories land. And this is where increasingly, if you are in the spiritual coaching space, especially, where there's going to be a struggle, because a lot of people have been leaning on just lean back and hold the vibe and things will come. They're not storytelling. They're not bringing authenticity and truth and passion and realness and grittiness into their brand. And people are starting to demand that feeling of real connection above and beyond it, quote unquote, gets to be easy. Because it doesn't get to be easy. Building a brand is not easy. If someone tells you that, they're bullshitting you. Building a brand that actually leaves an impact, leaves a legacy, and scales is not easy. It's easy to have a couple of months that you're making good money, but it is not easy to build something that stays long-term, because the reality is the brand you have today is not the brand you're going to have in 3 days. You have got to constantly stay in front of the market, which means there's no place for complacency. As soon as you get complacent, things go backwards. So people are demanding this. Taylor Sheridan, he said, I will tell my stories my way. He refuses to dilute his voice or compromise his vision. And Zoe had said, she plays Jo in Lioness, and she had said, like, either you get it or you don't. And if you get it, you're on board and you love it. And if you don't like him and you don't want to work for him. And that's the kind of raw authenticity we need as personal brands, regardless of our industry, whether you're writing for Paramount or you're just starting out, leaving corporate and building a personal brand based on brand you. Now, when we're also looking at Sheridan, one of the things I really love is he sees things differently. And we learned this from Steve Jobs, the Think Different campaign, where he talks about the crazy ones, those that are willing to think differently, change the world. And I believe, and it's my belief, that he has stayed so true to who he is and how he sees things differently. He always says he has characters that drive the plots, not plots that drive the characters. That is rewriting and blowing up the script. Yet he stays true to that. And he's also come under fire from apparently firing writers, or come under fire during the writer's strikes. He's kind of known as the quote unquote lone wolf, but it's because he's so dedicated to the script. He's so dedicated to his story and how he tells it. And love him or hate him, he lives true to the Steve Jobs ethos of see things differently. And those that see things differently will change the world. People were getting tired of the same old narrative of storytelling. People were getting tired of the same old narrative of what was being pumped out by streaming networks. Let's be honest, it's mostly crap. It's mostly how fast can we get content out? And they were hungry for a unique approach to storytelling, a unique approach with character-driven plots. And Taylor Sheridan unapologetically gives people what they want, unapologetically. Now, another thing to keep in mind when we're looking at Taylor Sheridan, like I said, is a big piece of his why, if we go back to his why, was the ranch, the 4-6 ranch. Now, he says in the Hollywood Reporter interview that the owner of the 4-6 ranch had messaged him and offered for him to purchase the 4-6 ranch. And he said, well, how much is it? And they said $350 million. And he said, I'm short 330. So I was a little bit off, 330 million short. But please, you thought enough to call me. Will you give me 2 weeks? And it was that opportunity that changed his mind about expanding his overall deal with Paramount Global. So originally, he really valued his independence and preferred to be what he called a hired gun. But to buy the ranch, he signed a new contract that was reportedly worth $200 million, wrangled some additional investors to bridge the gap. And he jokes that I was real rich for 45 minutes, he says in the Hollywood Reporter, then I was broke again. That was a trade. But his passion was very much the same as John Dutton. And he had that why. He was worked off his tail for it. And that's the trade-off a lot of people aren't willing to make. A lot of people are saying, I want the success of becoming the Taylor Sheridan, doing the series, writing the series, or the success of the Taylor Swift, but they're not willing to sacrifice the way they are. Taylor Sheridan, you could argue, had, maybe too much on his plate, although that's, he's very clear that is not why it took almost 3 years for the Part B of Yellowstone to come out. But you could argue probably the most overworked man in Hollywood, and he did it for a bigger why. Taylor Swift, you see her say all the time that she gets on stage, whether she's sick, sad, has a broken heart, doesn't matter. There was articles coming out trashing her. She was wiping snot from her nose as she was sick during a concert. Like, what do you want the woman to do? So these moguls, these heavy hitters that have built these brands, they're not taking a day off because they have period pains. They're not taking a day off because they didn't sleep well. They're showing up for a bigger why that drives that short-term discomfort. You need a bigger why to drive that short-term discomfort. Otherwise, you're going to be like, why am I even doing this? And I think most entrepreneurs say that to themselves regardless. However, you need a bigger why. Making money, living purpose, and freedom are not purpose-driven brands. And this is where so many brands and creators get stuck. They focus too much on the what and forget the why. But Sheridan's clarity of purpose keeps his work aligned. It keeps it magnetic, and it keeps that golden thread moving through where you watch something and you're like, is this Taylor Sheridan? Like, this has to be Taylor Sheridan. And you will seek out his shows and his content because of that character-driven plot that is unmistakable and absolutely magnetic, and again, stands out from the way other things are written. Now, he even says, and he says this, he was talking about the writer's room issue and why writer's rooms don't work for him. And he's come under fire for that, especially during the writer's strike. Now, he says, my stories have a very simple plot that's driven by the characters as opposed to characters driven by the plot, the antithesis of the way television is normally modeled. When you hire a room that may not be motivated by those same qualities, and a writer always wants to take ownership of something they're writing, and I give this directive and they're not feeling it, then they're going to come up with their own qualities. So for me, writers' rooms, they haven't worked. I love this. A lot of people are going to put him under fire for that. Like, not a team player, lone wolf, all this crap that comes out online about him in regards to this. The man knows what he wants, and he is not willing to compromise. He even says in the Hollywood Reporter, I've spent my life compromising. I am not compromising anymore. It's basically his way, or he walks out with his script. And good for him. And I think more people should be willing to not compromise on their dreams and their vision and the movement they're creating in their personal brand. When we compare this to movements for you, movements are character driven, not plot driven. They aren't about rigid frameworks or artificial formulas. They're driven by authentic human connection and human dynamics. That is what creates a movement worth saying yes to. And so many people are doing plot-driven movements or tool-driven movements. I have the tools. I'm a Gene Keys expert. I'm a human design expert. And they're putting themselves into rigid frameworks and artificial formulas. And that is why their brand isn't growing. There's no authenticity, there's no storytelling, and there's no deeply dynamic human aspect to it. So I want you to start reflecting on, where are you doing plot-driven or tool-driven building and scaling within your personal brand, and how can you move it to character-driven? This also goes into the thread that I've always said of, you are the brand. You are the brand. So how can we make it character driven, not just with you, but with the entire community, moving towards a shared vision, connecting through authenticity and very human dynamics. And the human dynamics piece is going to depend on your niche, right? It's going to depend on what you do. Who are you serving? What are the human dynamics that are a part of that? However, when we look at the Taylor Sheridan effect, his stories are driven by the characters. And successful movements are driven by the raw relationships and emotional connections between the people involved. They can't be forced. They can't be overly scripted. I always joke that, most of the time I'll have points I want to hit for something, But more or less, I don't edit my videos. I just come and stream it live, record it. I don't edit, other than if I am doing something pre-recording, there's big gaps. But that's the raw piece. I'm not overly editing myself, mostly not editing myself at all. And that authenticity has also grown my brand. Like, yes, I'm going to mess up. Yes, I'm going to say, yes, I'm going to stumble on my words or maybe misspeak. But I would rather that raw authenticity of this is who I am, take it or leave it, than be overly edited. And that's also not just a personal choice in who I be and what I believe in, and also why I don't have professional photos and really overly curated videos, because I want that deep human connection. It's okay to be flawed. And not only is it okay to be flawed, but it's important to show those flaws so that you're connecting with the right people. Now, as a little editor's note here, there is a difference between social filtering and self-censorship. Brands are not built on self-censorship. They are built on social filtering. And that's something to keep in mind as well. So when we're looking at Sheridan, he really has these characters you fall in love with, and successful movements are driven by raw relationships. So how can you bring more of that in? How can you stop feeling overly scripted? And when you bring in voices or strategies that don't align with your core vision, the core vision that the movement itself is in service to, it's going to dilute the vision. Now, Leah Hormozi talks about this a lot, like strategic alliances as well, right? So when we look at it from the Taylor Sheridan perspective, he talks about the strategic alliances in the writer's room and how a lot of writers don't see his vision and try to change it. Leah Hormozi talks about this as well, of be very careful about the alliances you build. So this is true as well when we're looking at from a movement creation. If you're bringing in voices or strategies, and this could even just be the people you hang around with. The people you hang around with are voices that you do not need as a little devil on your shoulder. It dilutes your vision. And that's why he avoids the writer's room, and why clarity and alignment are critical in movement building. So I want you to start looking at, how do you ensure your movement stays authentic? Well, one, it starts with defining what your ranch is, and we're going to discuss that later. However, you need to know your bigger why. Now, when we look at building like Sheridan as well, what we want to do is look at finding your golden thread. As I said, I had a You Are the Brand series in 2023, and one of those pieces and the workshop was based on find your golden thread. Your stories may seem very different. Your interests may seem very different, yet they all have a common thread that unites them and leaves a distinct fingerprint on your work. How this applies to him and what he's built, right? So we have Mayor of Kingstown, 1883, Lioness, which is special ops about the Lioness program with the CIA. We have Yellowstone, which is the Western, if you will, his take on a Western. We have Tulsa King, which is the mob. We have such a variety, but I want to look at, well, what is his golden thread? So even though his shows span different genres, what is his golden thread? And his fingerprint, once you start to recognize it, is deeply recognizable. Number one is power dynamics and survival. At the heart of every Taylor Sheridan story is an exploration of power. Who has it? Who's fighting for it? What does it cost to hold on to it, right? In Yellowstone, spoiler alert, pause or fast forward maybe 15 seconds, but it costs John Dutton his life. In Lioness, it costs Jo her family, and it's her the power dynamics and exploration of power. It's essentially her job is starting to erode her family. The mob, Tulsa King, they're grappling with survival in high stakes environments. High stakes environments. It's not what to have for dinner. So his stories are about real people who will do whatever it takes to protect what's theirs, whether it's land, family, legacy, what they believe in. Jo keeps saying, like, I believe in my work in Lioness. And that's where she starts to get into a struggle over, I love my family and I really believe in the work I'm doing, but it's also destroying my family. And it's a really beautiful back and forth fight over what does she choose. 2, the price of loyalty and legacy. Loyalty is both a virtue and a curse in his world. His characters are bound by loyalty to their families, Yellowstone and Beth, right? Like loyalty to her dad. Teams, Joe and Lioness, this loyalty to the team and the job, even if it is a matter of her family falling apart. Even if it destroys them, you can see Joe and Lioness like being destroyed internally as you see her progress through the seasons over this. And we see this as well. Yellowstone, the Duttons, the intergenerational struggle and trauma, if you will, over protecting their land. Tulsa King is mob loyalty binds characters to systems they can't escape, even if they want to. And so his signature here is he shows how loyalty and legacy are kind of these double-edged swords, powerful motivators, but also chains that bind us. And his characters' sacrifice for their loyalties reveal their humanity as well. And, you know, you can see yourself even in Joe and Lioness, even if you're not working for the CIA, you can see her if you're a high-powered entrepreneur and female, especially if you have children, of that internal struggle of job versus family and how do you find that balance. So I think it's so deeply relatable, her characters, even if you're not working for the CIA. 3, this could be controversial, but I'm going to say it, well-written, complex women. Now, there is a lot of controversy over Beth. I loved her from day one. I saw her as a woman that was deeply traumatized and went through a lot in her life and developed coping strategies to survive. Ultimately, a lot of people didn't like her, and Taylor Sheridan was actually even told in the beginning to tone her down because people wouldn't like her. From day one, I saw her as a deeply flawed woman, that the flaws were born of her deep trauma and what she had been through. And from that moment, I just connected so deeply with Beth. But a lot of people don't like her. But I see it as well-written, deeply complex women and characters that you can get behind. Even Zoe and her character, Joe and Lioness, multidimensional women who are fierce, flawed, and unapologetic in who they are, and are often dealing with that internal struggle. Even Beth in Yellowstone, I really do believe there was this struggle, and she talks about it often, between blind loyalty to her dad and also realizing that what he was doing was maybe not in the best interest of the farm. He wasn't evolving with the times. And you could see that struggle internally with her. And you could also see that struggle with Jamie, her brother. I do believe there is a side of Beth that's soft. And I do think, and people might disagree, that there's also an internal struggle of feeling betrayed by someone close to her. And I think that's also the deep-rooted issue of why there's so much vitriol and hate towards Jamie over what he did, is like, you also betrayed me. So when we look at how he writes women, they're not just strong, they're relatable. Like I said, you might not be in the CIA, but you can relate to Joe's struggles as she's trying to balance her life, her family with her career. Another one is a big piece of morality as a gray zone. So he writes these rarely writes clear-cut heroes and villains. His characters operate in shades of gray, making choices that are both morally questionable and deeply human at the same time, because the reality is we are deeply human. We are deeply flawed. And morality is a gray zone for a lot of people, and you make decisions with the information you have at the time. And it's easy as a viewer to watch a show and be like, oh, I wouldn't have done that, or you shouldn't have done that. But how often in our day-to-day life do we do things and later we look back on it and like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or maybe that wasn't the best decision I made. But it's true for John Dutton, his ruthless decisions, the Lioness operatives and their sacrifices. We also see that, and I don't want to continue to spoiler alert, but the Lioness operatives, it's very much this internal dilemma of, does the work that I've been contracted to do and I'm obligated to do, does it go against my morals? Does it go against my ethics? What happens when love and duty collide, and what do you choose? And how do you look someone in the face and follow through on something when there's that internal conflict? His writing is just fucking epic. So his characters are completely flawed, and they're compelling because they're flawed. And that's what I center in my brand as well, is I'm flawed, I'm not going to get it right all the time. And in fact, most of the time I don't. And in personal branding, you also have to be willing to be flawed. You have to be willing to get it wrong, to fail publicly, because you always have to stay ahead of the curve, which means you're never getting complacent in your brand. People that think you just put like one signature offer and just coast on that for life and nothing ever changes in the market because, well, no one else is doing what I do. Well, good luck, because as you get complacent, thousands of people are coming up behind you to bite you in the ass for it and to take over your spot and to overtake you. If they are smart and industry leaders in their own right and innovators in their own right, they're going to overtake you. That's just business. It's not personal. It's just business. So there is this aspect as well of really, you have to be flawed and be okay with being flawed to be an entrepreneur and be very successful. Now, one thing I actually like about his shows as well is nature as a character. And the settings in his shows aren't just backdrops, they're active participants in the story. So from the unforgiving wilderness in 1883 to the sprawling landscapes in Yellowstone, I find nature to be as much a part of the story as any human villain or any human character. And we really see that, especially in Yellowstone, because the whole point is to preserve the land. So his environments are characters. They inhabit this wild, untamed, almost dangerous in some aspect to life, forcing people to adapt or perish. And it's like this primal, real feeling. And you even see that again in Lioness when you talk about the desert and little aspects of being an operative and how nature works against you. So he does have these core pillars that we're looking at. If I was going to summarize them, I'd say number one is power dynamics. Movements challenge existing systems and redistributing of power. Two, I would say legacy and loyalty. Movements thrive, and your movement's going to thrive when they're rooted in a shared vision and a willingness to make sacrifices for the cause. And old versus new, I would say, would be another core theme. Movements bridging tradition and innovation, honoring the past while forging a new path forward. And that never stops. Forging a new path forward never stops. As soon as you stop and get complacent, someone is there to take your spot. Someone will be hungrier than you and take your spot. And again, I think a lot of people take that personally in personal branding and business. It's not personal. It's just business. But if you want to be successful and stay ahead, you have to be constantly looking at the brand I have today is not the brand I'm going to have in 4 days. It's not the brand I'm going to have in a year from now. Core principles may be the same, but the material plane is always mutating. And if you don't adapt, you die. That is Ra Uru Hu from the Human Design System that said that. Now, backlash and building something worth doing. We need to talk about it because one of the things I hear the most from really impactful clients that I have, they're building legacies and building these big movements is like, I'm getting backlash. Yeah, that's the world we live in, unfortunately. And it might not be something fun to initially come to terms with or to address for the first time, but that is literally the world we live in. Everyone has an opinion, and with the internet, it can stay where, people are saying things that they wouldn't say to your face. It's unfortunately the age we're in. So when we look at backlash, anyone that's building something worth doing is going to face backlash, period. People are not going to like you. They're going to have shit to say about you, and they're going to try and take you down, maybe successfully. And the thing with Sheridan that I like is not everyone likes him. Like what I see as yes, when I read the Hollywood Reporter, I'm like, fucking A, man, fucking A. And I'm like cheering him on. Other people write follow-up articles trashing him for being egotistical. Right? So no matter what, someone's not going to like you. And no matter what, someone's going to have something to say. You have to be so grounded in who you are and know who matters in what they say. And likely it's not some stranger on the internet writing trash articles about you. So there is a subset of people who outright hate his work, people that can't stand him, people that are intentionally trying to bring him down. Like I said, who saw the same Hollywood Reporter interview I saw and said he's an egotistical asshole, basically. And I'm like, fucking A, man, you're the shit. Keep going. Now, I will say typically the rebel outlaw brand archetype does tend to get a little bit more backlash because the whole point of the rebel archetype is challenging norms and challenging systems. So, using Taylor as an example, he's challenging the traditional writer's room as a very basic example. He's challenging the traditional writer's room format. So that's going to be met with issues. If you are creating something worth creating that's going to challenge the narrative, you're going to be met with backlash. Now, critics have argued that some of his female characters are underdeveloped or overly sexualized. I don't really see that. Maybe you could. I mean, there was a couple moments in Lioness where the character of Cruz, I was like, I don't know if this was necessary, but I don't really see it in many respects. His decision in Yellowstone to kill off certain characters has outraged people. People accusing him of disrespecting their journey. People accusing him of taking too long to put shows out, which he's responded to and said ultimately that he was never in charge of the schedule in that respect. So it was never him that was delaying it. He was also quoted in Variety as saying, in addressing backlash around Yellowstone, they referred to it as the conservative show or the Republican show or the red state Game of Thrones. And I just sit back laughing. I'm like, really? The show's talking about the displacement of Native Americans and why Native American women were treated, or how the way they were treated, and about corporate greed and the gentrification of the West and land grabbing. That's a red state show. So again, people are going to nitpick at you. And this isn't an argument if you agree or not with his view on Yellowstone or someone else's view on Yellowstone. The whole point is people are going to love you or hate you for the exact same fucking reasons. They're going to love you and hate you for the same reasons. So people that love him and the characters, even I was reading an article with one of the characters and I can't remember, I wish I would have linked the article, but it was in regards to is it really his place to be telling Native American stories? And some of the characters and the men and women that played the characters in his show were speaking out about it and saying how respectful he was and how they had a voice and how they were represented. And they had a voice. And there's, I think in Yellowstone, war markings put on the horse. I think it's Yellowstone. And they said they had a voice in it and how they would actually mark the horse and going into battle. So you have some people that are like, he's respecting it, and other people saying he's disrespecting it. The point is, if you're doing something great, if you are following your heart, if you're doing what's true to you, there are going to be people that love you. There's going to be people that hate you. Now, he had also said something off screen where he said, I don't really give a shit about a line producer or some physical production person thinks. And in many ways, I can see how people could take that negatively. And I can see how they can take it negatively in his talk about the writer's room and what his core value is. If you understand the man, if you understand the mythos around Taylor Sheridan, is his work is his baby. And he will not give up his work for anyone. Like he has said multiple times, I've compromised enough in my life. If you don't like it, if you don't want to do it how I want to do it, I'm just taking it somewhere else. And he says, I'd rather it never see the light of day than not be done how I want to do it. And so for me, I actually really respect someone that's like, it's my way or the highway because it's my vision. And you don't have the story without me. How are you going to do the story without me? So where a lot of people might trash him for that and say he's disrespectful, he's arrogant, he's egotistical, I see someone with a big vision. I see someone that's deeply in love with their work and obsessed with how it's presented, and it needs to be presented in a certain way. And if we look at Taylor Sheridan, if you ask me, obviously he's doing something right because he's the only, I honestly believe he's the only creator right now where I will actively just seek out what he's writing. I will actively seek out what he's put out. I would not traditionally watch a mob show with Stallone. I don't think I've actually ever seen anything Stallone's done. I said that to Scott when we were watching Tulsa King. I said, I don't think I've actually ever watched, like everyone knows who he is, but I've never, I don't think actually watched. And he has epic movies. Not that he's done mob before, but Stallone's work never has drawn me in. I've never watched The Godfather. I've never watched anything that's mob driven. I guess you could argue Sons of Anarchy, maybe. maybe. But I've never really watched mob-driven shows, and couldn't look away. I couldn't look away because the way he writes. Military shows, I do like, what was one with Claire Danes? Oh, it's going to drive me crazy now, and Scott's not here to shout it from the other room. But I really did like her show. Is it Homeland? I think it's Homeland. But I typically don't watch CIA type shows. I'm more of like the Yellowstone type show. I watched it, captivated by Lioness. Like, honestly, I don't know how I'm supposed to survive a year until it comes back. He's doing something right. He is propping up Paramount. He is continuously bringing in millions of viewers to Paramount. So when we're looking at building a movement, people are not going to like you. Period. There is nothing you can do about that. And trying to control people's perceptions of you is a losing battle. You're never going to win that. It's like whack a fucking mole. So instead of expending your energy on trying to control the critics, create for those that love you. Create for the right people. That's the focus you need to have, because whack-a-mole is going to drain you. Now, when we look at that as well, we can look at the opposite, how to build like Sheridan. So in one hand, we have the critics of he's this horrible person and egotistical and arrogant and whatever, and destroying the industry. And then on the other hand, you have him being propped up as he's boosting film incentives. He's boosting Native Americans on screen. And again, that is controversial. There's many voices that, and I respect that, are saying it's not his story to tell. And there's many voices that are saying he's very respectful of the stories he's telling and in the way he's handling our story. So again, you're going to have people on either side. We have articles out, Taylor Sheridan effect is impacting everything from production incentives to headshots. It's literally called the Taylor Sheridan effect. So he obviously knows what he's doing. But again, we just went over his critics. We just went over people saying he's like the worst thing to ever come to the entertainment industry. And now we have the other side of people saying he's the best thing. That is what you have to be prepared for if you are actually building a brand and movement worth being seen. Hiding behind the tools isn't going to get you there. Putting the tools first, not going to get you there. You have to put your vision and mission first. Back it up with character-driven stories. Your people. How can you bring humanity back into your message? I tell my clients this all the time, and those that get it and scale, and those that don't struggle. You have to be a storyteller. In an age of AI, I can pick up my phone, go into ChatGPT, and probably get, especially if I put your name in, what you're putting out into the world. I can use ChatGPT to do market research. I can do it to see trends. I can use ChatGPT for anything. Google has even jumped on the bandwagon of AI, where if you type in a question, it has AI results before you even have to click on a website. Since Google started doing that, the amount of clicks I've given websites has plummeted because I get my answer right away. Why am I going to click on a website for something when I can get my answer from AI? So we have to shift. If you want to stay ahead of this, you have to understand that AI is coming for your niche. AI is coming for your job. Copywriters, marketers, especially if you're newer, if you don't have, say, like 15 years of authority in the online space, it's coming for you. So how do you stand out? You have to be willing to storytell. You have to be willing to go live. You have to be willing to get your face out there. If you're doing the bare minimum, expect the bare minimum back. And it's just period. And this is where we're going to see 2024 is eaten a lot of personal brands. A lot of people have been taken out of the game. 2025 is going to be worse. You want to know why? AI is going to get better. If you are unwilling to storytell, if you are unwilling to put character-driven plots at the forefront, rather than tools, rather than the plot itself, you are going to struggle. And a lot of people don't want to hear that, but those that hear it and it clicks with are going to be the ones that survive and thrive. So if we look at how to build like Sheridan, well, the Sheridan effect talks about the impact he's had. I know if you're here, you want to have an impact. You want to change your industry, the world, something. You want to do good work, like me with the sanctuary. You want to do good work. So when we look at Taylor Sheridan, production incentives, he's increased film incentives in Texas, Native representation. So his work has helped increase the number of Native Americans on screen. I look forward so much the repeat characters across all backgrounds and ethnicities. You fall in love with these actors, and I just love his work. I'm obsessed with his work. So Wind River was actually inspired by the story of a young woman who was raped and murdered. Oh shit, I shouldn't have said that for YouTube. On the Wind River Indian Reservation, Wind River also highlights the difficulties of bringing her perpetrators to justice. Sheridan says that the film influenced the passage of the Violence Against Women Act. That has also caused some backlash. There's both sides of it, whether he did influence the passage or not. The Native American community have been pushing a lot for that as well. I do think there's something to be said for the fact that big media and big players in the game can help get things pushed. I do think there's something to be said for that. Unfortunately, is that something I like? No. I worked in the mental health field for a long time, and I remember what it's like to try and get things passed. I was telling my clients the other day that I worked as a counselor for youth that were in a group home, and their time there ended at 18, and they had no resources between 18 and 21 back then. I don't even know if they do now, to be honest. And so I was trying to help be part of the movement to bridge that gap. And I was advocating for the girls to be able to stay in the home until they figured something out. Like, you're kicking them out on the street at 18, they have nowhere to go. So I also understand from real life experience how difficult it can be to pass certain acts, how difficult it can be to change institutions or the way things are seen, especially when we get politics involved. So I do believe there's something to be said for having heavy hitters get behind movements. Corporate strategies, it shows how he's helped Paramount streaming service become honestly a must-have for viewers. He's safe, in my opinion, if you look at the numbers, saving Paramount. Educational programs, he's helped create the Fort Worth Film Collaborative, which addresses the need for trained film crews in North Texas. So again, we have on one side people that hate him, on the other side people that love him, and that's ultimately how you build a brand. That's how you build a movement. If you are trying to appeal to everyone, you appeal to no one at the end of the day, because you're not actually taking a stand on anything. Your movement is not a stand for anything. When I talk about building a sanctuary and the fact that it's a farm animal sanctuary and I'm vegan, it naturally polarizes people, right? It naturally polarizes people when I believe that animals are friends, not food. When I talk about desiring the next level of this growth of the movement I'm creating is funding universities would be the goal. I'll need to be able to invest millions of dollars into that. However, the next step is helping to fund universities that are committed to reducing or eliminating animals in research. All of this is controversial. And that's a movement that's going to call to the right people. When I work with people, I want people that actually, even if they don't necessarily agree with certain things I see in terms of animals, they're people that actually want to change the world. I want to work with ethical business builders, personal brands, innovators that see things different and want to bring about a different world. So it's important that I position that at the front as well. So when we're looking at building like Sheridan, one, define your ranch. What's the deeper mission driving your work? Why are you doing what you're doing? Freedom is going to, especially if you're new into the online space, if you're doing it for freedom, baby, I'm telling you, you're going to burn out fast. Because especially in the beginning, when you are making a name for yourself, you're going to work harder than you've ever worked in your entire life if you want to grow. If you want maybe a couple successful months or to make a couple grand here and there, then don't worry about it. It's fine. But if you actually want to be someone that's making millions and creating a legacy, you're going to work harder than you've ever worked. So the mission driving your work, if it's freedom, you got to find something bigger than that. If it's money, you got to find something bigger than that, because the ROI is not necessarily going to be overnight. So why are you doing what you're doing? Not only that, but how can you connect it back to your audience and what they want, your community and what they want? Connect it back, create that real human connection. to care desperately. Like Sheridan, you have to be all in. His success comes from the fact that he doesn't just write scripts, he pours his soul into them. And also, not only is he passionate about his scripts and his shows, but he's passionate about the why on the back end of it, which the why on the back end of it is he wanted to buy this 4-6 ranch. And he was what, $320 million short to build it. So we also have to look at that of you have to care. If you're not passionate about your work, no one else will be. And I've said this to clients in the past when they get on consulting calls with me, where I say, I sound more passionate about your work, right? Because I'll say something about it and I'll bring some copywriting in or marketing magic in or sales psychology. But ultimately, all I'm doing is bringing actual passion to what they're telling me and reflecting it back to me. And they go, oh my gosh, I want to buy my own work from you. How do you do that? And I'm like, I'm just passionate. I'm just bringing passion into it. And it's not even my work. So if you're not passionate about it, people are going to feel that. And why should people be more passionate about your work than you are? Why should people give a damn more about your work than you do? You need to bring the passion. You need to care. And when you care and you're passionate about it, other people will be. And even for myself, like I bring a lot of pop culture. This is pop culture. I bring pop culture, ADHD, and because I'm ADHD, I bring, just like quirks about my personality into my brand, but that's all intentional. Like it's authentic connections. I've defined my ranch. I've defined who I am. I care desperately about the work I do. And I tell my story my way, which is point 3. Tell your story your way. Stop trying to fit in. Stop watering down your message. Sheridan doesn't write for everyone, and neither should you. The more authentic you are, the more magnetic your brand becomes. You can't put sales psychology on crap. And what I mean by that is you cannot put sales psychology on something you don't care about and you're not showing up for. You just can't, especially in a day and age of AI. If you don't care, if you're not passionate, if you're not bringing the human aspect to it, I'm going to pick up my phone and use ChatGPT and not pay you. Period. So you need to bring that human connection. You need to be willing to not fit in. You have to be willing to do things differently. You have to be willing to think differently. And as Steve Jobs would say, make it simple. I've said for years, even before I knew Steve Jobs talked about that, simple scales. Simple scales. Stop making things so complicated. So again, we already said this, but my ranch for me is not just a metaphor. It's real. When I first started my online business and I left corporate, I would tell a story about how I couldn't wait to bring my horses home. Monty had, a lot of medical issues at the time, and it was really hard to find a facility that could accommodate them. I'd go and there was always something that didn't sit right when you're keeping horses at someone else's facility. No matter how much you love them, when they're your animals, you're likely going to do things differently. So I always tell the story about getting the farm, unloading Monty, starting the farm animal sanctuary, actually bringing animals home and saving animals that would have been sent to slaughter or would have, had a sketchy end. And then I always used to tell the story of bringing Luna home. She is a horse that I met 11 years ago now. She came home last year. But I had helped. She was seized by the SPCA in Canada, in Ontario. And I had helped in her rescue and finding her a rescue to go to. I had wanted to keep her in my own care, but unfortunately, because I boarded horses and she has a traumatic past, so she can be volatile. If she gets nervous, any kind of thinking brain goes out the window and it could be dangerous for staff. So it became a liability. And I didn't want one day for her life to be on the line because of that. So we found a rescue for her, and that rescue, within minutes of her changing hands, it fell apart. They were horrible. They weren't even treating her properly. When I started to make it public what was going on, they weren't following medical advice. They blocked me from their accounts. Anyone that knew Luna was blocked from their accounts. And sure enough, years later, she had a medical event because they weren't willing to follow. And this is like a rescue or a quote unquote sanctuary in Ontario. They eventually got the horses removed. were seized by the SPCA. I followed her story the whole time. She went to a different rescue who I reached out to when she moved to the other rescue. And I said, hey, I know this horse. I was part of her rescue years ago. This is her real history. She was sent with no history. But anyway, long story short, I was like, I want to bring this horse home. So within like 2 months of moving here and getting the farm, we brought Luna home, and I brought people on that journey. And now people are coming on the new journey with me, which is the next evolution of the sanctuary and the next evolution of helping animals and doing good work in this world. So ultimately, what I want you to ask yourself today is, what is your version of the ranch? Right? So Sheridan created all the shows to buy the ranch. He had a bigger why. It wasn't just because he had nothing better to do. 2, what's the deeper purpose driving your work? Freedom is not it. More money will not be enough, because let me tell you, not only are you going to have a hard time in the beginning, but you're going to have times where shit isn't working and you have to get scrappy and you have to fight for it. And you have to be willing to like claw yourself out and figure shit out, right? You also have to be willing, when I talk about deeper purpose driving your work, you have to be willing to always stay ahead of the curve. And quote unquote freedom or more money or purpose isn't going to be enough when you constantly are having to reinvent yourself. Are you building something that aligns with your why, or are you just chasing the what? And for what is the core movement your community can get behind and that inspires action? Brands get seen. You'll see brands go viral online. Movements inspire action. So it's time to lead the movement and build the mythos around you and your brand. And for me, archetypes is a big piece of that. Branding archetypes, as well as leveraging BG5. And that helps inspire action. It disrupts the status quo and it helps you stand out. So I have some really powerful done for you offers coming, and those should be live by the end of the week. So this is recorded December 3rd. If you want to jump on those, a done for you offer, you know, I have to tell this story. When I was reflecting on the direction to go, I was like, I cannot sit and try to figure out niche with someone for 4 hours because they're unwilling to be specific. Like, I can't fucking do it. I cannot do it. And so when I was looking at the evolution of the brand, it was a realization that I needed to move into more done for you, for those that are ready for that type of specificity and that type of consultation work. So, you know, the reality is, when you're kind of in this identity crisis, the more you surround yourself with people that support that identity crisis, the more it's going to be drawn out. And what I mean by that is, for example, say you are really struggling with a niche and specificity in your brand. Well, if you're surrounding yourself, but you're not making money and your brand isn't growing, if you surround yourself with people that are like, no, that's okay, that's how you scale, it's fine, just do what you want, just say what you want. Well, doing the same thing isn't going to get you different results. Doing the same thing is not going to get you different results. You have to do things differently. You have to think differently. So anyway, when I was looking at this, I was like, I need to, one, the field is changing. The niche is changing. What people are looking for is changing. And 2, I need to do what lights me up. And talking about niche for 4 hours just ain't it. Talking about strategy and authority and BG5 just ain't it. So I'm moving over into a lot of done for you offers. And those will go out to the email list first to snag those spots. So make sure you're on the email list. You can join that at ashleybrandeve.com. And if you want to discuss coaching options, support at ashleybrandeve.com is my email. All right. If you enjoyed this, please share it with someone. Let me know your biggest takeaway. Let me know what you think of Taylor Sheridan. Do you watch his shows? Do you enjoy his shows? I want to hear your views on who he is, how he writes, because the richness of that, like, I'm all in on the Taylor Sheridan universe. Other people are going to hate him. That's the whole point of building a brand. And so I hope you guys see that, right? It's not whether he's a good guy or a bad guy, or we should love him or hate him. That is the entire point of building a brand, is create division. All right. I'll see you in the next one, guys. I hope you enjoyed.